Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From the Ground Up, a University of Chicago public policy podcast produced here at the Harris School of Public Policy. Today, we bring to you the third episode of our Rare Earth series. So, in the first episode, we spoke about what rare earths are, briefly discussed what are their applications, and also discussed how the global supply chain looks like and what are the challenges embedded in it. In the second episode, we explored the applicability of rare earths in two critical industries, which are consumer centric, by the way. And how are these industries in itself trying to grapple with the challenges that are existing in the global supply chain? And we also briefly touched upon the possible trade offs that are existing with rare earth mineral mining. We also had some interesting guests with us on the podcast. If you have not checked those episodes, I would urge you to check them out because those episodes gave a very refined understanding from an industry insider perspective as to what is the current situation of rare earths, how is the industry thinking about it, how are countries strategizing to maximize their impact and maximize their position in the rare earth supply chain, and what are the possible trade-offs. So, in today's episode, what we are going to be discussing is A, what are these possible trade offs? B, what does it look like to be possibly dealing and managing these trade offs across the board? And three, what are certain actions needed to pave a way towards a net zero carbon emission economy? Now, with this, let's deep dive and start this episode. Today, with us in the studio is Christian Guyona,
Howdy.
Adidapo Aziz,
It's always good to be back.
and Hugo. He is on spring break, so he will not be joining us. So hey, a shout out to Hugo and hope you're enjoying your break. With this, let's just deep dive into our conversation. So Christian, in the episode that we had with Mr. Eric Schreider, he discussed certain trade-offs, right, associated with rare earth mineral mining, and how he discussed a very interesting premise, right, as to while rare earth minerals have an applicability directly associated with green energy technology, the entire process is not actually green, right?
Yeah, that's right. The entire process from mine to market, mine being where we actually extract rares directly from the earth, to market being when we implement them into our finished technologies like wind turbines, for example, or EVs or consumer end technologies like my MacBook Pro. The process getting them to market is not net zero efficient in that we emit carbon, whether it's through transportation, consumption of energy to manufacture these technologies, consumption of energy for the mines, or anywhere across the board. And so the actual process of bringing rares into our products is very carbon intensive.
Right. I think I loved another point that he made. It was basically around the fact that when we look at rare earth and its applicability towards green energy, what we are discounting is how those equipments are being manufactured in the first place that would be contributing to generation of green energy, right? How are those minerals being mined, A, and B, how are those manufacturing units being facilitated in terms of energy consumptions? Because today, I mean, even in the United States and majorly across the world, the manufacturing industry is primarily being fueled and facilitated by the conventional sources of energy, so to say. And the conventional sources of energy are associated with carbon emissions and contributing while playing an essential role in driving the society forward by giving us energy, and because of which our daily life is in place. It is contributing to the global climate crisis. And here is where we need to explore how can we manage these trade-offs, the associated environmental trade-offs, in such a way that while now the end product only is facilitating the green energy transition and the carbon reduction, what can we possibly do to ensure the entire supply chain from mining to the product itself and the product's application becomes more efficient, becomes more environment friendly, so to say, and facilitates our green energy transition and paves a path towards a net zero carbon economy. Now, Christian, while we were discussing the other day, we stumbled upon a very interesting concept, right? About rare earth mineral recycling, so to say. Can you help us understand? Because with text change involved with a lot of projects, and with you talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, you have a great insight as to what the green and what the rare earths mineral recycling bit looks like. So it would be interesting for our listeners to know more about it.
Sure, I can speak briefly on that. Aside from mining, there are other means of sourcing rare earth minerals, and one way is sourcing them through recycling. However, recycling technology is still, I wouldn't say it's in its infancy, but it is still developing to be more efficient, to be feasible, but that still has a way to go. And what I mean by that is recycling the end products, extracting those rare earths again from our products at the end of their life, and putting them back into new products to be used later.
Good,
However,
good.
the process is very carbon intensive in that, again, like you mentioned, you could have the most net zero carbon free manufacturing plant, which I've spoken to a few of companies. And the reality is, when I ask them, well, where do you source your energy? And then they say, well, we don't have control over that. And that can be attributed, and it depends. There's actually a case that we're hearing now on climate disclosures for public companies that we've been talking about in security regulations. But if you're still sourcing, let's say here in Illinois, there's a rare earth recycling plant, and you're sourcing your energy to run this plant from coal, which is not uncommon here in Illinois or in the Midwest. We have a lot of coal here. Then are you really carbon free if if you're depending on the energy production from coal, from fossil fuels? I would think not. But the ironic part, the caveat, is the whole purpose of recycling those rare earths, of extracting rare earths even, is to replace that source with a renewable energy piece of technology, whether it's a wind turbine or a solar panel or alternative sources of energy production, maybe geothermal, hydro, whatever that might be.
Right. I think it's contextual to actually bring up here that for the listeners that look, rare earths at in today's day and age have immense applicability, immense demand, right? The demand almost always exceeds supply. So now what's happening is we are mining these rare earths at a rate which is not per se meeting the demand that already exists in the market. Now, what recycling bit is doing is reducing the pressure on those mining activities that are going on to ensure that A, they are sustainably done, B, there is time for efficient R&D to take place so that the processes become streamlined, more efficient, and third is ensure that the minerals that are already extracted are utilized to its fullest possible potential, so that one, the rare earths, that is a commodity that we do not have in abundance, or rather I would put it this way, that this commodity at some point may just run off, right? So to ensure that they are possibly utilized fully, and B, what recycling would in turn do is ensure that the emissions that we did at the stage of mining, that cost is not incurred again, and it's set off in the ecosystem itself in a very, very long run, but provided the recycling is efficient and is carried out in a way that also takes care or is mindful of these carbon emissions and adopt certain practices that ensures ecosystem efficiency holistically. But in a recent episode that we had with Mr. Eric Scheider, who is the author of The War Below, if you have not checked that episode out, please do check it. It's a great one. So he said that we are not yet there with the recycling tech, right, Christian? Because there is immense amount of work to be done, and the industry is trying to heavily invest in R&D. But I mean, do you think it is we can expect like a product or a technology in the recent future that enables the recycling streamlining bit? Because when we had, drawing an analogy here to another industry, the nuclear energy industry, and to our event that we had with the nuclear energy industry leaders on uranium mining, on nuclear energy. We had the CEO of Alpha Noor, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan, his company, and they are involved in such interesting work to ensure that the recycling of nuclear materials takes place in such a way that the thing that the product that was thought of as waste can be reapplied to the industry and hence create efficiency. How he explained was absolutely brilliant. He said that imagine there is a chocolate, and after some time the chocolates get sprinkled with some wafers and there is some material outside which makes the chocolate appear less appealing, but that's really not the case. So they are trying to develop a technology that scrapes out these wafers, and the chocolate is 95 to 90% intact and hence can be reused and consumed by the industry. That was a very rudimentary analogy, a very simplistic analogy that he tried to put forth to the audience about his workings, right? We can also think about applying the same analogy and same technology in the rare earths ecosystem.
I think that there is some progress, and there are heavy hitters, large companies that are invested into the recycling or the development of more efficient methods of recycling in rare earths. To name a few: Hitachi Metals, Umicore, which I believe is a Belgium company. They're in Brussels, and Energy Fuels here in the United States, as well as Global Tungsten and Powders Corporation. So those are just a few large companies that are actually invested in the recycling of rare earth minerals and metals. But I think there's still a long way to go. While that is promising to have large companies invested in this, it doesn't seem to be having as much success at least right now compared to, like, let's say the lithium recycling market, which in the United States, we have several successful startups that already do this. However, those startups were founded 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so they're farther along in their process to recycle lithium and provide a source of lithium for reuse in consumer products. So that's just one. But I think that it's promising, like anything else in research and development. And as a startup founder myself, you just have to keep going. If there's a will, there's a way. And if you have capital, it makes it a whole lot easier to fund research and development, to create more efficient, or to develop more efficient technologies. So you just have to keep grinding at it. And I think we're at this point where we want to see this, but we need to acknowledge that these are the realities, and this is only one piece to rare earth extraction. And so we have to invest more capital into R&D, into the development of companies that are already invested, or have those companies invested into more agile startups who are doing this work like they did in the lithium recycling network. So there's opportunity, and I'm hopeful. I have the chance to talk to directors and executives on some of the companies that I've mentioned, and I get to learn a little bit about what they're doing without them saying too much, because there are disclosure laws and securities regulations.
Yeah, I think one interesting way to think about this entire thing is twofold. One is an entity who's functioning in the business of recycling itself and heavily investing R&Ds and trying to make a business in the recycling ecosystem. The second would be an industry player that is positioned in an industry which is consuming a lot of rare earths. How are they trying to strategize their operations so that there is a movement of the rare earth embedded product within the company and the company's ecosystem? So to give you an example, I think I mentioned this in our interview and discussion with Mr. Scheider as well, that there is a startup in India which is dealing with EVs. So now one of the startups, what they're trying to do is ensure that their battery is recycled in such a way that they are trying to create racks, and the consumers, what they have to do is switch their batteries every single time they have to either they have to replace it. So they put it in the company's rack, then the company takes that battery, makes it more efficient, recycles it, and then puts it back into the market again. So that is also one of the ways that the industries that are heavily using, let's say, the rare earths, could be electronics, could be EVs, could be the products that are applied in green energy and are using rare earth products, rare earth minerals. I think this is a very, very interesting thought for them.
Yeah.
And
I was gonna say that we already have that a little bit in the US when it comes to for your everyday car. If you buy a battery at Advanced Auto Parts, for example, you can return the core and have some reduction in the price of your new batteries. And we have that in other type of products. For example, I used to work in car parts supply, and would return the core of some of our product of the parts of the car so we can get new ones cheaper. So I think this type of business model must be expanded beyond where it is right now. I think in the future, it in fact probably should become required as a part of government regulation. Why is this necessary? I think many times when we talk about renewable energy and we talk about mining, we lose the focus of why these things are important, which is carbon emission. And I don't think it's possible to, it's a personal opinion, but many scientists share the same opinion, is that it'll be really difficult for us to meet our carbon emission without reducing our use or making sure that we recycle as much as possible. Having said that, I understand that the goal of every business is to maximize profit. And so recycling for some businesses is not profit maximizing for them. But if for the greater good and for us to be able to meet our carbon emission goals, to meet our sustainability goals, we need them to recycle. I believe that government regulation needs to step in and require these businesses to do as much as possible to recycle the REMs they use in their products, either they're in renewable energies or creating everyday products. As we have the technology to do these things in more easily and in a more cost-effective way, we need to see these companies also step up, whether it's the most profitable thing for them to do or not. I know Kristen might disagree with me because he doesn't like government regulation.
I wasn't going to go in that direction, but what I was going to say is, to your point, that it is in the interest of the bottom line and to the shareholders of a company to be profitable. I think the other part of that, and yes, it is a lofty goal, is an admirable goal, and I do think we should work towards that. But regulating and requiring through some sort of statutory mandate, or I think that would be really difficult considering where the technology exists now. That's why there are companies who invest in those technologies or invest in startups that do those technologies, like rare earth recycling. For example, Novion in San Marcos, Texas, who's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, and we might have them on the podcast. They recently reached out to us because they wanted to discuss rares and manufacturing magnets. But that is a company that does that specific thing. That's what they're designed to do. Whereas a larger company may not be able to do that, and it's not in their scope of business, or they don't have that expertise at this time. So I don't think it should be required that they have recycling of their products. I do think it could be encouraged in a different way, maybe similar to the IRA, the American Inflation Reduction Act, in where you provide tax incentives and subsidies, because we're talking about regulations, subsidies to incentivize companies to source more of their materials from a recycler, let's say an Apple or a renewable energy company like Invenergy or something like that, that would incentivize them to source their materials from these recyclers. I think that would be a better approach starting off, until we get to a place where recycling is more efficient, more feasible, and we have a larger scope of companies that can do this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think it'd be stupid to, require companies to do that at this time or even in the coming years. But I was speaking more about like, in a in that future that we speak about where recycling REMs are way much easier, they're more effective, and they're more cost effective, specifically. But we're not there yet. We're not even close. So I think when we get there, then there could be, hard regulations. But before we get there, we have to encourage companies, and we have to encourage companies in the renewable energy industry, including the companies who are making products, but also the ones that are recycling the REMs, to be able to take more risk and, include that in their business operations.
Okay, so this brings us to the end of this episode. So we explored certain trade-offs that are existing in the ecosystem and what we need to do to ensure that the ecosystem per se becomes more robust and more efficient when it comes to carbon emission reduction. Now, with this, when we were discussing, it also came out as to how pressing this problem is, how important it is to be solved. So we as a collective team would urge a lot of entrepreneurs to try and solve this problem if this interests you, because A, there is an industry need, B, it is a critical problem to solve, and C, of course, there's a market. So with this, we end this episode, and we really hope that you enjoyed the three-part series that we tried to bring to you. And if you have not already, again, do check out our episodes with Professor Mills and Mr. Eric Schreider. They'll give you some interesting insights into the ecosystem. But yeah, we'll be meeting you soon again. If you have any comment, any suggestion, anything that you want us to talk about, please feel free to email us at uc3p from the ground up at gmail.com. And take care. Bye bye.